The bus rattled over another pothole and I pressed my forehead against the window, watching Montana unfold in shades of gold and green. 3 days ago, I'd been in Seattle, surrounded by glass towers and the constant hum of city life. Now, the landscape stretched empty and endless, broken only by the occasional fence line or cluster of cattle. My father's words still echoed in my head. "You need to learn what real work means, Daniel. A summer on your uncle's ranch will do you good." At 24, I'd thought I was past the point of being sent away like a troubled teenager. But after losing my third job in 2 years, this time as a graphic designer at a startup that folded, Dad had put his foot down. His brother, my Uncle Roy, owned a cattle ranch outside of Birch Creek, Montana, and apparently I was about to become a ranch hand. The bus pulled into a town that looked like it had been frozen in time around 1975. A single main street, a handful of shops, a diner with a flickering neon sign. I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped off into the afternoon heat, immediately aware of how out of place I looked in my designer jeans and vintage band t-shirt. "You must be Danielle." I turned to find a woman in her 50s, weathered and strong, wearing a plaid shirt and a knowing smile. Her truck was parked behind the bus stop, mud-splattered and well-used. "Mrs. Crawford?" I asked, recognizing her from old family photos. "Call me Sarah, your uncle's wife, though I'm sure you remember me from when you were little." She took my bag and tossed it in the truck bed. "Roy's back at the ranch dealing with a fence situation. You'll meet him soon enough." The drive to the ranch took 40 minutes, most of it on dirt roads that wound through rolling hills and pastureland. Sarah filled the silence with practical information. Wake-up time was 5 a.m., meals were communal, and I'd be sharing the bunkhouse with the other hands. "Other hands?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "4 others right now. It's a small operation compared to some, but we run about 800 head of cattle. You'll learn the ropes quick enough." She glanced at me. "Your daddy told Roy you've never done manual labor." "I've had jobs," I protested. "Office jobs, computer jobs." She didn't say it meanly, just matter of fact. "This is different, but don't worry, the boys will show you what's what." The ranch appeared over a rise, a collection of buildings clustered around a large barn, corrals spreading out behind it, and vast pastures beyond. It was bigger than I'd expected, but still had a worn, working quality to it. Nothing was here for show. Sarah parked by the main house, and I barely had time to register my surroundings before a man emerged from the barn. My Uncle Roy looked older than I remembered, his face deeply lined from years in the sun, but he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in his environment. "Daniel," he pulled me into a brief, strong hug. "Good to see you, son, been too long." "Thanks for having me, Uncle Roy." "Well, your daddy thought you needed some honest work and we can always use an extra pair of hands." He studied me with shrewd eyes. "You look soft, but we'll fix that. Come on, I'll show you the bunkhouse." We walked past the barn and I caught glimpses of horses in stalls, the smell of hay and manure thick in the air. A few chickens scattered from our path. Everything felt overwhelmingly real and immediate in a way my life hadn't been for years. The bunkhouse was a long, low building with a covered porch. Inside, it was simple but clean: 6 beds, a potbelly stove, a table with mismatched chairs. 3 of the beds were clearly occupied, personal items scattered around them. "You'll take that bed there," Roy said, pointing to one near the window. "The crew's out checking the north fence line, but they'll be back for dinner. Sarah's cooking pot roast tonight." He paused at the door. "One more thing, we work hard here, but we're fair. You pull your weight and you'll be treated right, understood?" "Yes, sir." After he left, I sat on the bed and looked around my new home for the summer. The mattress was thin, the pillow flat. My apartment in Seattle had heated floors and a view of Puget Sound. This felt like stepping into another century. I unpacked my duffel, feeling increasingly ridiculous about the clothes I'd brought. Multiple pairs of skinny jeans, graphic tees, a nice jacket for evenings out. Nothing here was appropriate for ranch work. I'd have to ask about getting proper gear. The sound of hoofbeats made me look out the window. 3 riders were approaching, moving at an easy lope. Even from a distance, I could tell these were men who'd grown up in the saddle. There was no awkwardness in how they sat their horses, no visible effort. They were simply part of the animals beneath them. I watched them dismount and begin unsaddling their horses with practiced efficiency. Two of them were older, maybe in their 40s, but the third was younger, tall and lean, moving with an unconscious grace as he led his horse into the barn. Something told me I should go introduce myself, but I felt suddenly nervous. These men belonged here in a way I never would. They'd probably take one look at me and see exactly what I was, a city kid playing cowboy for the summer. But hiding in the bunkhouse like a coward wouldn't help anything. I made my way to the barn, my boots bought specifically for this trip and still stiff, crunching on the gravel. The interior was dim and cool, smelling strongly of horses and leather. I could hear voices from the stalls, the sound of grain being poured, the soft nickers of horses eating. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding too loud. The voices stopped. A moment later, one of the older men appeared, short and stocky with an impressive mustache. "You must be Roy's nephew. I'm Pete, been here about 15 years. "Daniel," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was calloused and strong. "This here's Marcus," Pete gestured to the other older man who'd appeared, tall and black with graying temples. "And that's Finn." The younger cowboy emerged from a stall, and I felt my breath catch. He was maybe my age, perhaps a year or two older, with dark hair curling slightly under his hat and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. His face was tanned and angular, a few days of stubble on his jaw, and when he moved there was something almost liquid about it, economical and sure. His work shirt was open at the collar, revealing a triangle of tan skin, and his jeans were worn soft from use, dusted with dirt from the day's work. But it was his eyes that held me. When he looked at me, really looked at me, something shifted in the air between us. It was like being seen, truly seen for the first time in my life. Not the polished version I presented to the world, not the disappointing son my father saw, but something deeper and truer. The moment stretched, probably only seconds, but feeling much longer. I saw surprise flicker across his face, then something else, recognition maybe, though we'd never met. Like he'd been waiting for something he hadn't known to expect. "Finn Walker," he said finally, his voice low and slightly rough. He didn't offer his hand, just nodded, but his gaze never left mine. "Daniel Costa," I managed. "You Roy's nephew, the one from Seattle." "That's me." "Well," Pete said, breaking the tension, "we better get cleaned up for dinner. Sarah doesn't like us coming to the table smelling like horses." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You ride, Daniel?" "Not really, I took some lessons when I was a kid." Marcus chuckled. "You'll be riding plenty soon enough. Come on, let's get you settled." As we walked back to the bunkhouse, I was acutely aware of Finn walking slightly behind me, could feel his presence like heat against my back. When we reached the porch, he finally spoke again. "You'll want to get some proper work clothes, those jeans won't last a day." I looked down at my expensive designer denim. "Yeah, I figured, where do I?" "There's a feed store in town that sells gear. I can take you tomorrow after morning chores if you want." "That'd be great, thanks." He nodded and brushed past me into the bunkhouse, and I caught the smell of him, sweat and leather, and something else, something clean and masculine that made my mouth go dry. This was going to be a problem. I'd known I was gay since I was 15, had come out to my family at 17 to mixed reactions. My mother had been supportive, my father less so, not actively hostile but disappointed in that particularly painful way. It was part of why he'd sent me here, I suspected. Some idea that hard physical labor and masculine company would straighten me out. But Finn Walker, with his amber eyes and unconscious grace, was exactly the kind of man who'd always been my weakness. And the way he'd looked at me in the barn, if I wasn't mistaken, and I didn't think I was, suggested the feeling might be mutual. This was going to be very complicated. Dinner was a boisterous affair around a large wooden table in Sarah's kitchen. The food was simple but hearty, the promised pot roast with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed around me as the men discussed the day's work, upcoming tasks, cattle prices, and weather predictions. I mostly listened, trying to understand this new world I'd entered. There was an easy camaraderie among them, the kind that comes from working closely together in difficult conditions. Even Uncle Roy, who was technically the boss, seemed to be one of them rather than above them. Finn sat across from me, mostly quiet, occasionally adding a comment or answering a question. Several times I caught him watching me, and each time our eyes met, I felt that same jolt of connection. "So Daniel," Sarah said, passing me another slice of pie, "what did you do in Seattle?" "I was a graphic designer, web design mostly." That's computer stuff, right? Marcus asked. Yeah, making websites look good, basically. Pete shook his head. Can't imagine sitting at a desk all day staring at a screen. Don't know how you city folks do it. It's different from this, I admitted, but I liked the creative aspect, making something from nothing. Not so different from ranching then, Roy said. We're creating something too, just with cattle and land instead of pixels. After dinner, the men drifted to the porch with beers. I followed, uncertain of my place but not wanting to seem standoffish. The sun had set and the sky was beginning to fill with more stars than I'd ever seen in the city. The air had cooled, carrying the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and the occasional yip of coyotes on the hills. 5 a.m. comes early, Pete said, standing and stretching. Best turn in. The others agreed and we filed into the bunkhouse. There was no bathroom inside, just a washroom with a basin and mirror. The actual facilities were in an outhouse behind the building, which felt charmingly primitive until I realized I'd actually have to use it. I changed into sleep clothes, gym shorts, and a t-shirt, acutely aware that the others were doing the same. Years of gym locker rooms had taught me to be casual about undressing around other men, but this felt different somehow, more intimate. Finn's bunk was 2 over from mine. In the dim light from the lantern, I watched him pull off his shirt, revealing a lean, muscled torso marked with a few scars, the body of someone who did hard physical work every day. He caught me looking and paused, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Lights out, Marcus called, and someone extinguished the lantern. I lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of 4 other men breathing, the creak of bed springs as someone shifted, a cough from across the room. The mattress was indeed thin and I could feel every imperfection in it. The pillow smelled like whoever had used this bunk before me. Outside, coyotes yipped and howled. An owl called from somewhere nearby. The wind rattled the windows in their frames. It was nothing like the ambient city noise I was used to, the traffic and sirens and voices that formed the soundtrack of urban life. I thought about Finn's eyes, the way he'd looked at me in the barn, the glimpse of his bare torso in the lamplight. This summer was going to test me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Someone shook my shoulder and I jerked awake, disoriented. The room was still dark and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. 5 o'clock, Pete's voice came from above me. Time to get moving. Right, the ranch, Montana, my new life. I dragged myself out of bed, every muscle protesting. I'd apparently slept tensely, my body not used to the thin mattress or the sounds of the night. The other men were already moving around in the dark, pulling on clothes with the efficiency of long practice. I fumbled for my jeans and managed to dress without embarrassing myself too badly. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, the stars still visible overhead. The air was cold and I wished I'd brought a heavier jacket. We gathered in the barn where Roy was already waiting. In the light of several lanterns, he outlined the day's work. The cattle in the north pasture needed to be checked and moved to fresh grazing, fences needed mending in 2 locations, horses needed shoeing, a dozen other tasks that meant nothing to me yet. Daniel, you'll go with Finn today, Roy said. He'll show you the basics. Finn nodded, not looking particularly pleased or displeased, just accepting the assignment. We'll start with feeding and then move cattle. You ever worked with livestock? No. Well, today you learn. The next hour was a blur of activity. I helped or tried to help with feeding horses and cattle. Hauling hay bales that were heavier than they looked, filling water troughs, mucking out stalls. My soft hands blistered within the first 30 minutes and muscles I didn't know I had began to ache. Finn worked with a quiet intensity, showing me what to do without much commentary. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't particularly warm either, and I wondered if I'd imagined the connection between us the night before. After a quick breakfast of eggs and biscuits in Sarah's kitchen, we saddled horses. Mine was an older gelding named Rusty, apparently known for his patient temperament with beginners. He'll take care of you, Finn said, checking my saddle and adjusting the stirrups. His hands were sure and competent, and when they brushed my leg, I felt that spark of awareness again. Just sit deep and trust him, he knows his job better than you do. His horse was a paint mare named Sage, flashy and energetic. He mounted in one smooth motion and gathered his reins, looking down at me expectantly. My mount was less graceful. Rusty stood patiently while I struggled into the saddle, my legs protesting as I swung them over his broad back. But once I was up, some muscle memory from childhood lessons kicked in and I found my seat. Not bad, Finn said, and I felt absurdly pleased by the faint praise. We rode out as the sun crested the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and pink. The beauty of it struck me, this vast, open country so different from anything I'd known. The silence, broken only by hoofbeats and the creak of leather, felt almost sacred. The cattle are about 2 miles north, Finn said, breaking the quiet. We'll check on them, count heads, make sure none are injured or sick, then move them to the west pasture. How do you move them? Pressure and release, you'll see. We rode in silence for a while and I tried to settle into Rusty's rolling gait. My thighs were already burning and I suspected I'd be extremely sore tomorrow. So what made you come out here? Finn asked suddenly. Your uncle said you're from Seattle. My dad thought I needed to learn some work ethic, I said honestly. I've had trouble keeping jobs in the city. What kind of jobs? Design work, office stuff, it never seemed to stick. Finn nodded slowly. City life didn't suit you. I don't know what suits me, I admitted. That's part of the problem. He glanced at me, something like understanding in his eyes. Well, ranch work either fits you or it doesn't, you'll know pretty quick. What about you? Have you always done this? Born to it, my family has a ranch about 50 miles south, smaller operation than this. I'm the youngest of 4 boys and there wasn't enough work to keep us all busy, so I hire out. Do you like it? He considered the question seriously. It's honest work, you put in effort, you see results, the land and the animals don't lie to you. Yeah, I like it. There was something in his voice, a contentment maybe, or at least an acceptance that I envied. I'd never felt that way about anything I'd done. We reached the cattle, a large herd spread across a gentle slope, grazing peacefully in the morning sun. Finn dismounted and walked slowly among them, studying each animal with a practiced eye. I stayed on Rusty, not trusting myself on the ground. See that one? Finn pointed to a cow slightly separated from the others. She's limping, we'll need to bring her in, check her hoof. How did you even notice that from here? Practice, you learn to see the small things. He remounted and began gathering the herd, moving Sage in smooth, calculated patterns that pushed the cattle where he wanted them. I tried to help, but mostly I stayed out of the way while Rusty, bless him, seemed to know exactly what to do even without direction from me. The horse positioned himself at the edges of the herd, adding pressure when needed, backing off when the cattle moved correctly. You can feel it, right? Finn called over. How Rusty knows the work, just trust him. And I did. I let the horse do his job and gradually I began to understand the dance, the way pressure from a horse and rider could move cattle, the importance of position and timing. It was nothing like sitting at a computer, but Finn was right, there was something honest about it. The injured cow proved difficult to separate, not wanting to leave the herd. Finn worked her patiently, never rushing, until she finally moved where he wanted. We drove her separately while the rest of the herd moved toward the west pasture, a slow but steady progress across the prairie. By the time we got the cattle settled in their new grazing land and the injured cow penned for treatment, the sun was high overhead and I was exhausted. Every part of my body ached, my hands were bleeding from broken blisters, and my thighs felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. Finn noticed me wincing as I dismounted. First day's always the hardest, your body will adjust. When? He laughed, the first time I'd heard him do so, and the sound was warm and genuine. Week or so, maybe longer for a city boy. We ate lunch sitting on the fence rail, sandwiches Sarah had packed, along with apples and cookies. Finn handed me his canteen and I drank gratefully, trying not to think about the fact that his lips had been on it moments before. You did okay today, he said after a while. Better than some city folks I've seen try ranch work. Really? Really, you're willing to try at least, that's something. The praise meant more than it should have, coming from him. I studied his profile as he gazed out over the pasture, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun caught in his dark hair, the easy way he sat the fence like he was born to it. As if feeling my gaze, he turned and met my eyes. That same charge passed between us, undeniable now. His expression shifted, something vulnerable showing through for just a moment before he looked away. "We should head back," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Still got chores before dinner." The ride back was quieter, both of us lost in thought. I replayed the day, the work, the conversation, the moments when our eyes had met and held. There was something between us, I was sure of it now. But what to do about it in this place, surrounded by other men, living in close quarters? I had no idea how Finn felt about being gay, if he even was gay. Rural Montana wasn't exactly known for its progressive attitudes, and even if he was interested, acting on it could complicate everything: my summer here, his job, the dynamics of the crew. But God, I wanted to know, wanted to ask, wanted to see if that moment in the barn had been real or just wishful thinking on my part. Back at the ranch, we untacked and groomed our horses. I was clumsy at it, but Finn showed me how to properly brush Rusty down, how to check his hooves, how to make sure he was comfortable before being turned out to pasture. "Horses work hard for us," Finn explained. "We owe them good care in return. It's a partnership, not just a tool we use." I liked that philosophy, the respect it showed. Everything about Finn suggested a quiet integrity, a man who thought carefully about his responsibilities and met them fully. As we walked to the bunkhouse, Pete called out that there was time for a shower before dinner if we wanted. A shower sounded like heaven to my aching muscles. The shower house was a separate small building with 3 stalls. Finn gestured for me to go first, and I grabbed my towel and clean clothes gratefully. The water was only lukewarm, but it felt amazing on my sore body. I stood under the spray, letting it wash away the day's dirt and sweat, already feeling the stiffness setting into my muscles. Tomorrow was going to be brutal. When I emerged, Finn was waiting on the bench outside. He stood when he saw me, and for a moment we were very close in the small space. I could see water droplets still clinging to the hollow of his throat from his own shower earlier. Wait, no, he hadn't showered yet. "All yours," I said, my voice coming out lower than intended. "Thanks." He didn't move, just looked at me with those amber eyes. "Daniel." "Yes." He seemed to struggle with something, then shook his head. "Nothing, I'll see you at dinner." He brushed past me into the shower house, and I was left standing there, my heart racing, wondering what he'd been about to say. Dinner that night was fried chicken, and I ate like I was starving, which I apparently was. Physical labor burned calories in a way office work never had. The conversation flowed around me again, but I was hyper-aware of Finn across the table, the way his hands moved when he talked, the rare smile that occasionally crossed his face at something Pete or Marcus said. After dinner, we gathered on the porch again. Someone produced a guitar, and Marcus began to play old country songs, folk tunes, melodies that seemed to belong to this landscape. The music drifted out over the prairie as darkness fell and the stars emerged. I sat on the steps, my back against a post, listening and watching. Finn was in a chair nearby, tipped back on 2 legs, his hat pulled low, but I could feel him watching me in return. When the others began to turn in, I stayed out a little longer, not ready to face the confines of the bunkhouse yet. The sky was magnificent, the Milky Way a bright river across the darkness, more stars than I'd thought possible. Pretty different from the city, I bet. I jumped slightly. I hadn't heard Finn come up beside me. "Yeah," I said, "I've never seen stars like this." He leaned against the porch rail, looking up. "I sometimes forget what a gift it is, living where you can see the whole sky. When I go into town, the light pollution bothers me now." "Have you always lived in Montana?" "Born here, never left, thought about it sometimes, but," he shrugged, "this is home. Can't imagine living somewhere where you can't see the horizon." "I can't imagine knowing so clearly where you belong," I admitted. "That must be nice." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "You don't know where you belong." "Not yet, maybe not ever. Or maybe you just haven't found it yet." The words hung between us, weighted with possibility. I wanted to ask what he meant, if he was suggesting something, but before I could find the courage, he pushed off from the rail. "Should get some sleep, tomorrow's just as early as today." "Yeah, good night, Finn." "Night, Daniel." I watched him go inside, then spent a few more minutes with the stars before following. The week that followed established a pattern. Up at 5, morning chores, breakfast, then out to work on various tasks around the ranch. I learned to mend fences, treat minor cattle ailments, brand calves which I hated, move herds, and a dozen other skills I'd never imagined needing. My body slowly adjusted to the work. The blisters on my hands became calluses. My muscles stopped screaming quite so loudly each morning. I learned to sleep through the sounds of the night and wake at dawn without feeling like death. Finn remained my primary teacher, patient and thorough if not particularly chatty. We worked well together, I discovered, developing an easy rhythm. He'd start a task, and I'd fall in to help without needing much direction. It felt natural in a way that surprised me. But that connection between us remained unaddressed, simmering just below the surface. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Other times our hands would brush as we worked, and the contact would linger just a moment too long. On Thursday, he drove me to town in Roy's truck to get proper work gear. The feed store smelled of grain and leather, and a weathered woman behind the counter helped me pick out sturdy jeans, work shirts, a proper jacket, gloves, and a hat. "You're Roy Crawford's nephew," she said, a statement not a question, "working at the ranch this summer." "Word travels fast," I said. She smiled. "This is a small town, honey. Everybody knows everything." I glanced at Finn, wondering if that meant people would notice if something developed between us. His expression was carefully neutral as he examined a saddle on display. When we got back to the truck, he sat for a moment without starting the engine. "That thing she said," he began, then stopped. "About everyone knowing everything." "Yeah," he stared straight ahead through the windshield. "It's true, in a place like this you can't keep secrets, people talk." My stomach sank. Was he warning me off, letting me know that whatever was between us couldn't happen here? "I understand," I said quietly. He looked at me then, something almost like frustration in his eyes. "Do you?" Before I could answer, he started the engine and pulled out onto the main road. The drive back was silent, tension filling the cab of the truck. I wanted to say something, but I had no idea what. Instead, I watched the landscape roll by and wondered if I'd misread everything. That night, I lay in my bunk listening to the breathing of 4 other men and feeling more alone than I had in the city. At least there, I'd known where I stood. Here, I was adrift, caught between a connection I desperately wanted and the reality that pursuing it might be impossible. Friday brought thunderstorms rolling in from the west, massive clouds that turned the sky purple and green, wind that bent the grass flat and sent the cattle running for shelter. Roy called all hands to the barn to wait it out. Lightning cracked across the sky so close the thunder was nearly instantaneous, and rain fell in sheets that turned the yard to mud within minutes. We sat in the tack room, the only space large enough for all of us, listening to the storm rage. Pete told stories about worse storms he'd seen, and Marcus countered with tales of blizzards that had buried the ranch in 10 feet of snow. Sarah brought out coffee and sandwiches, and we settled in to wait. Finn was quiet, sitting slightly apart from the group, watching the rain through the door. I found myself watching him instead of the storm, memorizing the line of his shoulders, the way he absently played with the brim of his hat. "Daniel," Roy said, pulling me from my thoughts, "how are you finding ranch life?" "It's harder than I expected," I admitted, "but I like it more than I thought I would." "You've done good work this week," Roy continued. "Sarah tells me you're fitting in with the crew all right. They've been patient with me." Pete laughed. "Hell boy, you're doing better than patient. You're pulling your weight, that's all we ask." The praise warmed me more than the coffee. In Seattle, I'd never felt like I was good at anything, never felt like I truly contributed. Here, after just 1 week, these men respected me for my effort. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it intensified, the wind howling through the barn rafters and rain drumming on the metal roof like bullets. Lightning illuminated the doorway in brilliant flashes, followed by thunder that shook the building. "This is going to flood the south pasture," Marcus observed. "Drainage wasn't great there even before this." "We'll check it when this passes," Roy agreed. "Might need to move that herd if the creek jumps its banks." The conversation turned to logistics and contingency plans, the easy shorthand of men who'd worked together through countless challenges. I listened and learned, beginning to understand how much knowledge was required to keep a ranch running, how many variables had to be considered. After an hour, the storm finally began to ease, the lightning moving east and the rain settling into a steady downpour. Roy declared it safe enough to head to the house for lunch, and we made a run for it across the muddy yard. Sarah had soup and cornbread waiting, and we ate around the kitchen table while the rain continued outside. Through the window, I could see the prairie transformed, puddles everywhere, the grass beaten flat, small streams forming in every depression. "Finn, Daniel," Roy said as we finished eating, "I want you two to ride out and check the cattle in the south pasture. Make sure none got stuck in the mud or injured. Take your time. If conditions are bad, we'll move them tomorrow." We suited up in rain gear, heavy canvas coats that would keep us mostly dry, and headed to the barn to saddle up. The rain had slackened to a drizzle, but everything was soaked and the horses were restless from being cooped up during the storm. Finn was even quieter than usual as we rode out, focused on navigating the muddy trails and swollen streams. I followed his lead, trusting Rusty to pick his way carefully through the treacherous footing. The landscape looked different in the rain, softer somehow, colors muted, everything draped in mist. Water stood in every low spot, and several small creeks we'd crossed easily before were now rushing torrents. "We'll need to ford that," Finn said, pointing to one particularly swollen stream. "Stay close behind me, keep Rusty moving, don't let him stop in the water." He urged Sage into the stream, and the mare plunged in gamely, water rising to her belly. I followed, my heart pounding, feeling Rusty's powerful muscles bunch and surge as he fought the current. For a moment, I thought we might be swept downstream, but then we were climbing the far bank, dripping but safe. "Good," Finn said, looking back at me with approval. "You kept your head." We found the cattle huddled in a grove of cottonwoods, muddy and miserable but apparently unharmed. Finn rode slowly through them, counting and checking while I kept watch from the edge of the herd. "They're all right," he finally announced, "but look at that." He pointed to the south, where a small creek had become a raging river, already overflowing its banks and spreading across the pasture. The water was rising visibly, eating up more grazing land by the minute. "We need to move them," I said. "Not today, too dangerous with the water this high, but first thing tomorrow we'll have to drive them to higher ground." He studied the flood with a grim expression. "This is going to cut off access to the south pastures for days, maybe weeks." We started back, riding along the higher ground to avoid the worst of the flooding. The rain had stopped completely now, and the clouds were beginning to break up, letting through shafts of golden afternoon light that illuminated the wet landscape in spectacular fashion. "It's beautiful," I said, almost to myself. "Even the destruction is beautiful here." Finn glanced at me, something softening in his expression. "Most people wouldn't see it that way." "What way?" "You see the beauty even in the hard parts. Most folks just see the problem, the flood, the work it'll mean, the lost grazing land. You don't see those things." "Of course I do, but I see the other part too. The way the land looks after rain, the way everything smells fresh and clean, the fact that this flood will make the grass grow better come summer." He paused. "You've got an artist's eye, I think. You notice things." It was the most personal thing he'd said to me all week, and I felt my chest tighten with something that might have been hope. We rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horses' hooves making sucking sounds in the mud. The air smelled of rain and grass and earth, clean and vital. "Can I ask you something?" I said, finally gathering my courage. "Sure." I struggled for words. "In the truck yesterday you said something about secrets, about how everyone knows everything here." He tensed slightly, his hands tightening on the reins. "I did." "Were you warning me about something specific?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he pulled Sage to a stop and turned to face me, his expression serious. "Daniel, in a place like this, being different isn't easy. People talk, they judge, they have expectations." He took a deep breath. "I've watched you this week, the way you move, the way you look at things, the way you look at me." My heart was pounding so hard I thought he must be able to hear it. And I recognize it because I look at you the same way." The admission seemed to cost him something. "But that doesn't mean we can do anything about it, not here, not without consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "For you, probably nothing too bad. You're just here for the summer," Roy's nephew passing through. "But for me, He looked away, jaw tight. This is my livelihood, my reputation, in a small community like this. Once people start talking, once they decide you're different, it follows you, jobs dry up, people treat you different. It's not like the city where you can just be yourself and nobody cares. So what are you saying? I asked, even though I thought I knew. I'm saying I want something I can't have, and it's driving me crazy having you around, working with you every day, watching you get stronger and more confident, seeing you fit in here like you were born to it. His voice was raw now, all the careful control stripped away. I'm saying I don't know what to do about this and it's killing me. The honesty of it hit me like a physical blow. He felt it too, this pull between us, this connection that had been there from the first moment, and he was as torn about it as I was. I don't want to make things harder for you, I said, if you want me to ask Roy to work with someone else. No, the word came out sharp. That's the last thing I want. I just needed you to understand why I can't, why we can't. I understand. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. We had the rest of the ride back to compose ourselves, to put our masks back on before we reached the ranch. By the time we dismounted in the barn, anyone watching would have seen just two coworkers who'd completed a task together. But I knew different now, and so did he. That night, I lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep thinking about Finn's words. In Seattle, being gay was no big deal. I had friends who were out, dated openly, lived their lives without hiding. But here, in rural Montana, the rules were different. I understood Finn's fear. This wasn't just about attraction or desire, it was about his entire life, his livelihood, his place in a community that might reject him if they knew the truth. Asking him to risk all that for what might be nothing more than a summer fling would be selfish and cruel. But God, it hurt, because what I felt when I looked at Finn wasn't just attraction. It was recognition, the sense of finding someone who saw the world the way I did, who understood something fundamental about me without me having to explain it. In just 1 week, he'd become the person I most wanted to talk to share things with, to be around. And I was going to have to let it go. Saturday brought clearer skies and the massive task of moving the cattle from the flooded south pasture. All hands were needed, so it was the whole crew riding out together, Roy included, though he usually handled more of the business side these days. The water had receded somewhat overnight, but the pasture was still a swampy mess, and getting the cattle out safely would require careful coordination. Roy outlined the plan as we gathered in the pre-dawn darkness. We'd bring them up the eastern route, which had the firmest ground, and pen them in the holding corrals until we could move them to the west pasture after it dried out more. It was hard, messy work. The cattle were skittish from the storm, reluctant to leave their shelter, and the mud made every step treacherous. More than once, a cow got stuck, and we had to rope her and help pull her free. My new skills were put to the test as I worked alongside the experienced hands, and I was grateful for every lesson Finn had taught me that week. Finn was everywhere at once, it seemed, cutting off a breakaway group here, helping free a stuck calf there, always knowing exactly where he was needed most. He moved with such fluid competence that watching him was almost hypnotic. By mid-morning, we had the herd moving in the right direction, a river of cattle flowing across the prairie toward higher ground. Pete and Marcus rode point, setting the pace, while Roy and I worked the flanks, keeping stragglers from wandering off. Finn rode drag, the dustiest and least pleasant position, but he never complained. The work was absorbing enough that I could almost forget the conversation from the day before. Almost. But every time I caught sight of Finn, that ache returned, want mixed with futility, mixed with regret for something that had never even had the chance to begin. We got the cattle safely penned by early afternoon, muddy and exhausted. Sarah had sandwiches and lemonade waiting, and we collapsed on the porch to eat and rest. Good work, everyone, Roy said, raising his glass. That could have gone a lot worse. Daniel, you handled yourself well out there. The other men murmured agreement, and I felt a swell of pride. I'd contributed meaningfully to something important. Whatever else happened this summer, I'd have that. After lunch, Roy declared the rest of the day free time, a rare gift. Some of the men headed to town, but I was too tired to face the drive. Instead, I grabbed a book from my pack and found a spot under a cottonwood tree by the creek, away from the bunkhouse. The water burbled peacefully and birds sang in the branches above. The book lay open in my lap, but I couldn't focus on the words. My mind kept returning to Finn, to that moment of raw honesty between us, to the impossible situation we found ourselves in. I must have dozed off because I woke to find the sun lower in the sky and someone sitting nearby. Finn was perched on a fallen log about 10 feet away, whittling a piece of wood with a pocket knife, his hat tipped back and his expression distant. "How long have you been there?" I asked, sitting up. "A while, didn't want to wake you, you looked peaceful." I watched him work the wood for a moment, long curls of shaving falling away to reveal the shape hidden inside. "What are you making?" "Nothing really, just keeping my hands busy." He glanced at me. "Everyone else went to town, figured you'd want some quiet." "And you?" "I'm not much for town on Saturday nights, too crowded, too loud, I prefer this." He gestured at the creek, the prairie, the wide sky. We sat in silence for a while, comfortable despite everything. This was what I'd miss most, I realized, not the dramatic conversations or charged moments, but this quiet companionship, the simple presence of someone who understood. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," I finally spoke. "About consequences and being careful. You're right, I don't want to cause problems for you." "I know you don't. So we'll just keep things professional, coworkers, nothing more." He set down the wood and knife, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. "Is that what you want?" "Does it matter what I want? You've made it clear what's possible here." "That's not what I asked." I met his eyes, amber in the late afternoon light. "No, it's not what I want, but wanting something doesn't make it right or smart or even possible." "No," he agreed quietly, "it doesn't." Another silence, this one heavier. The creek continued its eternal song, indifferent to human complications. "There's a line camp," Finn said suddenly, "about 10 miles north. Small cabin we use during fall roundup when we're working the far pastures. It's empty now." My heart started to pound. "Okay. If someone wanted to ride up there tomorrow, it's Sunday, another free day, they could check on the place. Make sure it's in good shape for when we need it." "Someone," I repeated carefully. "And if someone else decided to ride up there for the same reason," he let the sentence hang. "That would be a coincidence," I finished. "A coincidence," he agreed. "Nobody would think anything of it, two hands checking on ranch property." It was risky even this way, riding out together when we didn't have to, spending time alone where no one could see. But it was also the closest thing to a chance we were going to get. "What time should this hypothetical person ride out?" I asked. "Dawn, early enough that everyone else is still sleeping off their Saturday night in town. I'll be sure to mention that to them if I see them." The ghost of a smile crossed Finn's face, the first real smile I'd seen from him since our conversation in the rain. "Good." He stood, pocketing his knife and tossing the whittled wood into the creek. "I should head back, help Sarah with dinner prep." "Finn." He paused, looking back. "Thank you for figuring out a way." "Don't thank me yet, we're probably both crazy for even considering this." "Probably." After he left, I sat by the creek until the sun touched the horizon, my mind racing. Tomorrow, we'd have tomorrow at least, a few hours away from watching eyes and careful distance. It might be all we ever got, but it would be something. I barely slept that night, hyper-aware of Finn 2 bunks away, wondering if he was awake too. The bunkhouse was silent except for Pete's snoring and the occasional creak of bedsprings as someone shifted in their sleep. When my internal alarm went off at 5, I dressed as quietly as possible and slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The ranch was silent, everyone sleeping off Saturday night. Even the chickens were still quiet. I made my way to the barn where Rusty nickered softly in greeting. I was halfway through saddling him when I heard footsteps behind me. "Need a hand?" Finn's voice was low, almost a whisper. "I've got it." He moved to Sage's stall and began preparing his own horse. We worked in silence, the familiar routine of brushing and tacking up meditative in its simplicity. The barn was still mostly dark and I found myself moving closer to where Finn worked, drawn like a magnet. "You ready for this?" he asked, not looking at me. "Are you?" "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me thinks we should forget the whole thing, the smart part." "And the other part?" He finally looked at me, and even in the dim light I could see the want in his eyes. "The other part stopped caring about smart about 3 days ago." We led the horses out into the gray dawn and mounted. The ranch was still silent behind us as we rode north, side by side, into country I hadn't seen before. The sun rose as we rode, painting the clouds pink and gold. The prairie stretched endlessly around us, rolling hills and vast sky, not another human being visible in any direction. It was like riding into the beginning of the world. Finn set an easy pace and we didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable. This felt different from our work rides, more personal somehow, even though we were ostensibly doing the same thing, checking ranch property. After about 90 minutes, a small cabin appeared in a grove of pines on a hillside. It was rough, just one room built of logs that had weathered to silver with a stone chimney and a small porch. A corral stood empty beside it and a stream ran through the trees behind. "This is it," Finn said, dismounting, "the line camp." We unsaddled the horses and turned them into the corral with some hay Finn produced from a shed. Then we stood awkwardly by the cabin door, the reality of what we were doing suddenly very present. "We don't have to do anything," Finn said quietly. "We can just talk, or check the cabin like we said and head back." "Is that what you want?" "No, but I want you to know you have that choice. I'm not expecting anything." I stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of green in his amber eyes, close enough to feel the heat coming off his body. "Finn, I've thought about nothing but you for a week. I want this. I want you, however we can have it." Something in his expression broke, the careful control he'd maintained crumbling. He raised one hand slowly, giving me every chance to pull back, and cupped my jaw. "We can't tell anyone," he said, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "This stays between us, just for this summer, when you go back to Seattle." "I understand." "Do you? Because I need you to really understand. This can't be more than what it is. I can't give you more than stolen moments and secret rides. That's all I have to offer." "Then I'll take what you can give." He closed the remaining distance between us, and then we were kissing, soft at first, tentative, as if we both expected the other to pull away. But when neither of us did, it deepened, became something hungry and desperate, all the want we'd been holding back for a week pouring out at once. Visual prompt 36. Two cowboys kissing by cabin door, one hand in the other's hair, passionate and tender moment, morning light, sense of release and desire finally acknowledged, intimate and emotional. His lips were soft despite his weathered face, and he tasted like coffee and morning air. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, pressing myself against his solid strength. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "We should go inside," he murmured. The cabin was simple but clean, clearly maintained for use. A single bed with a worn quilt, a small table and two chairs, a fireplace, shelves with basic supplies. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the space. Finn pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncertain. It's been a long time since I've been with anyone, not since I left home, really, too risky. We'll figure it out together." We came together again, slower this time, taking our time to explore. His hands were work-rough but gentle as they moved over me, and when he pulled off my shirt, he looked at my body like it was something precious. "You've gotten stronger," he said, tracing the new muscle in my shoulders and arms. "Working here suits you." "I had a good teacher." We moved to the bed, shedding clothes between kisses. His body was beautiful, lean and strong, marked with small scars that told stories of years working with animals and equipment. I traced one on his ribs, a pale line about 3 inches long. "Barbed wire," he said, "when I was 16 trying to string a fence in a windstorm." Yeah. "And this one," I touched another on his shoulder. "Horse kicked me when I was 12, taught me to always approach from an angle." Each scar was a lesson, a memory, a piece of the life he'd lived. I wanted to know all of them. What followed was slow and exploratory, finding each other's rhythms and preferences, learning what made the other gasp or arch or moan. It was tender and sometimes awkward and absolutely perfect. Afterward, we lay tangled together on the narrow bed, his head on my chest, my fingers trailing through his hair. The sun had climbed higher and dust motes danced in the light from the window. "We should probably check the cabin eventually," Finn said, his voice lazy and satisfied. You know the official reason we're here. Probably. Neither of us moved. Thank you, I said after a while, for finding a way to make this happen. I'm pretty sure I should be thanking you. We can both be grateful. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me with an expression that made my heart ache. I wish things were different. I wish we could have this for real, not just stolen hours in secret places. Me too, but I'll take what we can have. That's the thing, though, he said quietly. The more we do this, the harder it's going to be when you leave. I'm already halfway to somewhere I shouldn't be with you. Where's that? Somewhere that's going to hurt like hell come August. I pulled him back down, kissing him deeply. Then let's make it worth the hurt. We spent the rest of the morning in that cabin, talking between bouts of touching, learning each other's histories and dreams, existing in a bubble where the rest of the world didn't matter. Finn told me about growing up on his family's ranch, the pressure to be a certain type of man, the knowledge from an early age that a part of himself would never be acceptable there. I told him about the city, about feeling lost and directionless, about parents who loved me but didn't quite understand me. You're not lost, he said, you just hadn't found your place yet. Have I found it here? I don't know, but you're different than you were a week ago, more settled, like you're starting to fit into your own skin. He was right. Despite the early mornings and hard work, despite the aching muscles and blistered hands, I felt more myself here than I had in years. It wasn't just Finn, though he was a big part of it. It was the work itself, the land, the simple satisfaction of a day's labor completed well. Eventually, hunger and responsibility forced us to action. We did a quick check of the cabin, noting a few repairs that would be needed before fall, and saddled up for the ride back. The return trip felt different. We rode close, our legs occasionally brushing, hands reaching out to touch briefly when we thought we could get away with it. The landscape seemed to shimmer with possibility. But as the ranch came into view, reality reasserted itself. We straightened in our saddles, put space between us, became once again just two coworkers returning from a task. Marcus was in the barn when we arrived, and if he noticed anything different about us, he didn't say so. How's the line camp? He asked. Needs some work on the roof before fall, Finn reported. Few other minor repairs, nothing urgent. Good, Roy wants us to start on the west pasture fence tomorrow. 3-day job, probably. We untacked and groomed our horses, careful not to stand too close or let our hands brush. But I was hyper-aware of Finn's every movement, and I caught him watching me more than once. That night at dinner, surrounded by the crew, I felt the weight of our secret. Every casual comment, every shared glance had to be carefully monitored. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. But when Finn's foot pressed briefly against mine under the table hidden from view, I felt a rush of warmth. We had this. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't public, but it was ours. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern. We worked hard during the days, always professional, always careful. But we found moments, a shared water break away from the others, a midnight conversation on the porch after everyone else had gone to bed, knowing looks across the dinner table. And when we could manage it, we rode back to the line camp. Sometimes we made love, sometimes we just talked or sat in companionable silence. Those stolen hours became the framework around which the rest of my days were built. I was falling in love with him. I tried not to, knew it was foolish and would only make the inevitable goodbye harder, but I couldn't help it. Everything about Finn drew me in, his quiet competence, his gentle humor, the way he saw beauty in everyday things, his fierce protectiveness of the land and animals in his care. And I thought maybe he felt the same. He never said it, we'd established early on that certain words were too dangerous. But I saw it in the way he looked at me, the way his touch lingered, the way he seemed to breathe easier when we were alone together. My body had transformed over these weeks. The soft office worker who'd stepped off the bus in June was gone, replaced by someone tanned and lean and strong. My hands were permanently calloused now, my movements surer. I could sit a horse for hours without thinking about it, read cattle behavior, fix a fence, rope a stray calf. Your daddy's going to be surprised when he sees you, Pete commented one evening. You've turned into a proper ranch hand. He'll probably find something to criticize, I said, but without much heat. My father's opinion mattered less and less these days. You planning to stay past the summer? Marcus asked. Roy could probably use you year-round if you wanted. The question caught me off guard. Stay. I'd been so focused on the present, on treasuring each moment with Finn before it ended, that I hadn't really thought about what came after. I don't know, I said honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. But the seed was planted. What if I didn't go back to Seattle? What if I stayed here where the work satisfied me and the land felt like home? What if I stayed for Finn? That night I brought it up when we were alone on the porch, everyone else having turned in. Marcus asked if I was staying past summer, I said quietly. Finn went still beside me. What did you tell him? That I didn't know, but I've been thinking about it. I could stay, Finn. If Roy would keep me on, I could make a life here. Daniel. I know we said this was just for the summer. I know you didn't sign up for anything more, but what if it could be more, not public? I understand that, but we could keep doing what we're doing. I could be here. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the dark prairie. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. You don't know what you're asking. It's one thing to hide this for a summer, when everyone knows you're leaving anyway, but to stay, to build a life here while keeping the most important part of yourself secret. It's not like the city, Daniel. You can't just close the door and be yourself. You'd always be hiding, always worried, always alone, except for stolen moments with me. I wouldn't be alone, I'd have you. In secret, in shadows. Is that really enough for you? If it means being with you, yes. He stood abruptly, packing to the edge of the porch. I won't let you do that. I won't let you give up.